Hello and welcome to VGC's review roundtable for Hellblade 2. Today I am joined by three other reviewers who have finished the game and are going to share our thoughts. I am joined by Tamoor Hussain from GameSpot, Stacey Henley from TheGamer, and Jon Clarke from XboxEra. Now, I'm going to start with you, Stacey. Elevator pitch. How are you feeling on Hellblade 2? Or technically, as it is called, Senua Saga, Hellblade 2, but I don't respect that naming convention whatsoever.
I think the naming convention kind of sums up how I feel about this game, because it's just one of those things where it doesn't really make that much sense, and you can see a much easier way of doing it. I feel a little bit underwhelmed by what Hellblade 2 does, because I loved the first game. I think it's in this strange place of, I'm sure we'll get on to this later on, but it looks amazing. Like, I don't usually go in for being impressed by graphics, but I really was by Hellblade. But I feel like a lot of things that it added to it seemed to almost dilute the formula. It wasn't making it richer. We've seen a lot of sequels that have gotten bigger, gotten bolder, added more things to it. I know you and I did the Spider-Man podcast a while ago, and we kind of discussed some of those things. It feels like with Hellblade, a lot of the things that have been added have just pulled it a little bit away from what I really loved about the first game. So I don't hate Hellblade 2, but my overall feeling, I think, is a little bit knocked just because of how much I really love the first one. The first one is probably my favourite first-party Xbox game of the last generation, and Hellblade 2 won't be of this generation. It just won't.
Yeah, like, it's funny. I was kind of okay with Hellblade 1. I agree with the naming convention. It feels like a retrofected. Yeah, like we got these the other way around on the first release, but let's swap them about. Like, what does Hellblade even have to do with it now we're not traveling to hell as in the first game? But quite the opposite for me on this one. I found this to be a much more refined version of their original vision, and probably the most immersed I've ever been in a game. Like, there was one point in combat, and we'll get into the details of how that stuff works, but it was 1 a.m. and I had the headphones on and everything. I actually ended up yelling out loud because I put it on hard to play because there's a dynamic difficulty scaler that makes life easy if you're struggling. And it felt so like under pressure to win, and the way the combat works, that I actually screamed like swinging my virtual sword. And I was like, that's never happened to me. So if Ninja Theory's goal was to immerse me in the world, they succeeded, I think. And yes, it does look stupidly good.
Huge fan of the studio. Love Ninja Theory. And liked the first Hellblade quite a bit. I think the sequel is probably the one thing that you can be that is worse than bad, which is mediocre and entirely forgettable. I think it feels like a game that didn't really have anything to say or do. It feels stagnant in a lot of ways. It feels laborious. And I take no pleasure in saying any of that. I really wanted this game to be a major moment for Xbox in their first party output. For me, it leaves me with more questions about Xbox and also Ninja Theory than I would like to have right now. So thoroughly underwhelmed is where I'm at with it.
Okay. Much like we've said, I think from a technical, like graphical perspective, you're going to find difficulty matching it with anything at the moment. Just from a sheer performance perspective, stuff like that is amazing. But from a gameplay perspective, I was also deeply let down by it. I think it's incredibly basic. I think the puzzles are kind of they suffer from a problem that I really hate in puzzles, where you've already worked it out for yourself, but the time it takes to actually do the puzzle is so long that you're like, let me just do something else. I think Senua is still like a really engaging character, and she's rendered amazingly. But I thought the supporting cast was pretty weak. It's weird to say this about a game that is 6 hours long. Like I recorded the whole thing, and I'm like 6 hours, 1 minute to finish it. But I would have chopped another 2 hours off of that and made it like this 4 hour super tight experience. I think it would have been a better game. I think the stuff it does with sound is amazing. I played it with really good headphones, and afterwards, like, you take your headphones off and you can still feel your head shaking. So yeah, the phrase tech demo sounds like a pure derogatory thing, but it is like almost like a best in class for that element of stuff, visuals, audio. But the game it's attached to, I really didn't work with. So we'll go through kind of bit by bit. If you're not aware, gameplay it's kind of a adventure game. There's puzzles, there's some combat elements. John, I wanted to come to you because you said you played it on hard. How did you find the combat? Because I felt like, while it was animated beautifully because it's all motion captured, every single combat encounter, I wanted one or two less enemies. Like, I was done with it before I was done with the section.
Yeah, that's probably why I was screaming at the TV. I mean, I think they've done... I think it's important to define what Hellblade is, because it isn't an action RPG, right? And anyone going in expecting a sword-swinging adventure is going to be disappointed, right? And I think that is a problem for Ninja Theory in that, yes, they have come out front and said this is a narrative immersive tale. It's a short thing, $50, yada yada yada. But as is always the case with video game marketing, they didn't say that in 2019, and the assumption that we all make is that the game is going to be bigger and better because, hey, you've been bought by a $3 trillion company. So, what was a very impressive indie venture when it originally came out, the first Hellblade, we expect more, right? But then, they came out before the game's like sort of hit this point in time and said, this is going to be a short, same as we've done. The combat on hard, it's all about timing the parries. I agree with you that, and I think there is a point where it gets relentless. The way they've done 1v1, you hear that when you read that in the previews, you thought 1v1? Like, really? Like, still?
Yeah.
But the way they have the animations kick in where you could be in mid-fight and someone will bump and then someone will get stabbed and then you're facing off again, felt very, very cool. I've never seen anything like that. And it does get to a point where there's like probably one too many, like, okay, I've killed this dude now. The underground tunnels, for example, there's a lot of dudes in there.
Especially towards that last section where they it's like the hardest the enemies are. And there's like a fire adjacent enemy that they kept using, and I was like, oh, come on, like, I know what we're doing here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I was about 7.5 hours on my first playthrough, but then I did often wander off the beaten path. And I think if there's one thing I can call out Hellblade 2 being better at, is Hellblade 1, it wasn't always super, super clear exactly where you could and could not go. And I feel like even though they've kept the super realistic art style intact, it is a little bit kinder in, giving you an idea of where you can.
They've got that white paint. It should have been bright yellow.
It's very really subtle. It's not yellow.
The discourse. I agree with that. There was actually very few instances where there was only one specifically where it was like, Jordan Niddler from Paisley, could climb up this, so you, Senua, could do that as well. The rest of it's pretty good about keeping it contained. Stacey, from a combat perspective, how are you feeling on it? There's not tons of combat. It almost punctuates each chapter, but how did you feel on it?
No, there's not tons of combat. I think, other than agreeing that there are just one too many every time or two too many, I think it all works quite well in how it delivers the kind of 1v1 style. There's a few battles where everything kind of mixes together. I think my problem with it is because with the exploration, there's no HUD at all, there's no compass, but there's no health bars, there's nothing at all on the screen. It's all just the game. There's nothing actually gamey about it to help you. And I think the intention of that is you're supposed to feel like you're always playing, because it moves quite seamlessly on a technical level between the combat and the cutscenes. But towards the end, especially when you are thinking, yeah, I'm over this bit now, it felt like instead of always playing the game, you were almost never playing the game. A lot of the very cool kills and most empowering moments for Senua, because they were choreographed so well, because Ninja Theory is a big believer in motion capture, and that's part of the game's overall vision, it didn't really feel like I had defeated a boss. And that probably comes back to John's point of this not being a traditional action RPG. You're not going to get the feeling that you get when you play Elden Ring from this. There's no kind of I've died 15 times or 55 times
Yeah.
and achieved something. So I think it definitely will depend on what you're looking for. If you want something that has this really amazing scope to it and the combat flows really well, I think you're going to find quite a lot to enjoy in Hellblade, but you probably aren't going to be doing those things. You know, you're going to be setting Senua up for the game to do those things for you. And I think on a first playthrough, that probably works quite well for players who are expecting it. But because it's so short and because there are different places to explore across the map, people who are going to replay this a few times, I think they will notice quite quickly that it repeats itself. You know, the key kills and things.
Yeah,
There's a couple of battles that I know we can't really go too much into where there's no combat. It's kind of a different type of victory. They were much more evocative for me.
I agree. And what you're referencing there is the traditional combat is Senua has like two moves. It's like a light, a heavy, and kind of a parry, kind of a slow down time thing that fills up as you do successful parries. That's like the gamiest thing in Hellblade 2, the kind of slow down time. But yeah, there is stuff later that you're not dropping into an arena and a health bar goes across the top and you're fighting this like 500-legged monster. Tam, how did you feel about the combat, and too much of it, too little of it? Would you prefer there was none?
It's really interesting because I don't have a good impression or a good kind of feeling around combat at all. I understand the framing that this isn't meant to be an action game in that same way that we expect, but which is understandable. But then the question that begs is like, what kind of game is this, and what kind of interactions are you as a player having? Because the combat, to me, it pretty much lays all its cards on the table within the first half an hour to 45 minutes, and then makes not a single advancement from beyond that point. And the issue is in that first 45 minutes, you have interacted with the combat in every conceivable way possible. And there's nothing else that will change to challenge you and to create any sort of satisfaction. And because it's so repetitive, combat then doesn't feel like a meaningful engagement with the game. It feels like a obstruction to a narrative. And that is the most frustrating place where you can be in, when the main thing that you're interacting with, the main thing that the mechanism by which players are interacting with the game is frustrating. And then it also, when the story itself is perhaps not as, the risk is if the story isn't hitting with people in that the way that they want it to hit, it becomes further frustrating, because then you've got two major pieces of this game that are underwhelming, which is how I felt. I felt completely disengaged the entire time I was playing that combat. I felt the lack of a challenge was like the least of its issues. I think the main issue was I just had no interest, or there was no satisfaction in swinging the sword, dodging, and the combat devolves into keep attacking and dodging until your thing fills up, your special parry ability. There's no timing based on that thing. You just hit it immediately, and whatever enemy you're attacking pretty much dies immediately on the standard dynamic default difficulty anyway. So it's a part of the gameplay that I felt was, whenever I engaged with it, was actively wasting my time. And that was really frustrating, because I know Ninja Theory, we all know Ninja Theory is capable of doing really good, intricate, satisfying combat, but also making its combat elegant in a bunch of ways. The lack of evolution, the lack of any sort of new idea here was really disappointing for me.
I think the combat would have been better served if virtually every enemy went down in one hit. Like, I thought the parry animations, especially in that kind of first fight in the rain, I thought all that stuff, again, looks brilliant. This game is so well animated, like to a ridiculous extent, that if every time you hit a parry, that was it, next one, that would have been fine. But it did come a point where I realised that because it's so animation heavy, it's also quite easy to break, where you can just stagger enemies and just go and that is it. That's obviously not like the cinematic way to play, but we can't be expected to play a kind of particular way. John, as someone who liked the combat, were you wanting more of it? Was it the right amount?
No, it was just enough for me. I mean, for me, the combat, it came down to, like, we talk about parry. It's worth just fully clarifying. There is a parry mechanic. You can hit the right bumper, and you will deflect if you time it just before they hit your sword. If you miss it, you'll just block as standard. But if you time it, you'll get blue sparks, and then you can stagger them and typically finish off most enemies with one hit of the Y button. You'll just stab them, and that's it. Some enemies will take a stab to the chest and go fully grumpy at you at the very idea that you would stab them in the chest.
That's the canonical term, fully grumpy.
Yeah. 10th century Iceland, these guys were made of sterner stuff. But yeah, like, once you had that nailed, like, it didn't get in the way for me. On hard, the parry timing felt a lot more stern, and I could swear that the focus mirror that you're referencing, Tamoor, was something that you had to build, and if you got hit, you lost your charge.
Yeah.
So there may be an accessibility element here when playing on dynamic, that because obviously they're very keen in some of the stuff that they built from an accessibility perspective to allow more people to play. But again, I don't feel like the combat was the actual focus. It's cinematic as hell, but the focus is the narrative, and the combat is part of delivering it. And I think that's the rub for me is that it isn't a sword and shield game.
Yeah,
it is part of the story because we're set against 10th century Icelandic people that could be stabbed twice in the heart and carry on. But it's just a cinematic way to also evoke some of that rage. So yeah.
Stacey, anything else on combat, or should we move on to my real guttural hatred for the puzzles in this game?
I know. I think I want to hear this puzzle rant.
Okay, it's not even a rant because they're not worthy of a rant. But when you get the first puzzle is, I'm pretty sure this is the first one. Shoot me if I'm wrong, but when you go through into the kind of abandoned village and there's like a sigil on the wall and you have to find those 3 images in the kind of abandoned town.
I'm gonna have to shoot you. You're wrong.
Am I?
Yeah. The first puzzle is just a simple find the symbol floating in the air, but it's the next big puzzle.
Okay.
So I'll give you the.
Okay. I've been shot. But the one I'm referring to is the one where you go through like the little abandoned houses, and I was like, okay, brilliant. Give me a reason to like go in here and, I mean, not find an audio log because it's 10th century Iceland, but I want to like look about. And then once that was done, I was like, okay, maybe we get a few more of those. The puzzles in this game are super easy. They also feel unbelievably out of time. There's a puzzle strand you do where you put light into little tubes and it changes what appears. There's a puzzle strand you do where you look at a bubble and it changes the world around you. All this stuff, visually spectacular, but when you break it down to, if you grey boxed it almost, it would be a puzzle from a PS2 game. Like, it is so incredibly basic and simple. And there's another one which is truly heinous, which is there's a plinth that is empty and there's a ball that you can see over there and you have to go and get that ball and bring it here. And I was like, what are we doing? Like, if do it once maybe and you just never think about it again, but they repeat the puzzles despite how basic they are. And yeah, they really let me down. The only thing that I thought was as kind of inventive as some of the effects in the story was there are, let's say, hidden faces throughout the world, and every time I saw one of those I was like, you clever bastards, like was like, that looks good. And it made me start to look at like every single rock and think, is that a face? And you'd see something out the corner of your eye and it wouldn't be a face, and more of that would have been great. But God, I would happily chop every single puzzle out of this game. I think it would make for a better experience. Tam, how you feel about puzzles?
Repeating what you guys have said, like, none of it was challenging. Like, at most, like, the orb one was challenging because it became annoying after a little while, where it's like, I see what I have to do. It's just the slow movement of getting it done.
Mm-hmm.
The puzzles kind of started to feel like a way to almost slow me down, if you know what I mean, from reaching the finish line.
Mm-hmm.
It felt I don't want to. I feel like I'm coming off very negatively and about the game, and I don't mean it to be like malicious in any way, but like it felt like a waste of my time. Like I didn't the whole like find these sigils in the environment thing. It was novel in the first game, and now I'm like you, where I'm like, we're doing this again, and this is it. Like it's also a weirdly gamey moment in a game that I'm not quite sure whether it wants to be a game or not a game, where it's like, oh, you go near it, and then all the like the sigil symbols appear in the air, and you can see them and that kind of stuff. And it's just like, what? Why are we doing this? And again, it does not evolve beyond that, other than like run around puzzles, look at a thing puzzle, and it wasn't meaningfully challenging. I feel like the face stuff was again novel, but then you go in there and you'd get like some was it like usually one of those like little notches on the tree thing,
trees,
which was
yeah.
like
Yeah.
yeah, and like I didn't really care about that. I was like, I don't really need this. And the other stuff is like the exploration you do to find the narrative audio logs in that era is it was really frustrating because the game is quite slow paced and you are not doing a lot for a really long time. You're just kind of holding forward and guiding Senua to the next part. And then you reach this moment where it's interesting, something you're learning something interesting, but you have to stay right in front of the item that you interact with.
Yeah.
Because if you walk away, you can't hear the audio log anymore and it's gone. So in a game that is already feeling quite slow, it wants you to stop and just listen for a bit. I was like, I feel there were times where I try and make a point of when I'm playing a game, making sure I'm focused entirely on the game.
Yeah.
This game has got like the highest or the lowest time to pick up phone ratio than any other. Like every few minutes I was picking up my phone. There were times where I was like actively walking as Senua and I would pick up my phone because I could see like all I have to do is hold forward here. And the camera will naturally pivot here and there, and it will get me to where I can see I'm going. And then when I get there, I'll hit the A button and climb up and carry on for another 20, 30 seconds. And there's so much of the game that felt that way, and the puzzles were also another part of it that felt like it was not respecting my time and also not giving me anything really interesting to kind of keep me engaged or like, stimulate me beyond it looks nice, kind of.
The thing you say about the gaming is actually interesting because those puzzles are the thing that will make you realize where you can and can't go almost. Like that's when you're walking against like the edge of the walls being like, is this the one I hop up? Is this the one that's like slightly too high? Whereas the rest of it, even the combat is like, you could sit and watch this and it looks amazing. I can never remember the person's name, but they do Twitter videos that are like, they got big doing like Last of Us combat where they'd like swing the camera around.
Probably still a legend.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Like it looks like that, but yeah, the puzzles were, they just, as you say, I don't think they were like a time extension device, but I do think it's a better game without them. And I think the audio log thing, first update, they have to be like, it just keeps playing. You can walk to the other end of Iceland and it'll keep playing because that feels like a weird oversight. But
for sure.
John, your thoughts on the puzzles in Hellblade 2?
As soon as the puzzles came back, I was like, this is going to annoy people. All right, now I didn't mind them in the first one, and the understanding that I have is because of Senua's condition. The whole, perhaps metaphor is the wrong word, but the intent behind it is that this individual sees and understands things from a slightly skewed perspective, right? So the gamification of it is the real world hallucinations that she's seeing and the symbols in everyday things and yada yada yada. That's my understanding of it, and that's what I took. It kind of just like they were on the edge, right? It was just I can totally get why someone would be like whatever with these. But like you said, they're not obtrusive. Some of them are a little bit back and forth in their design, but there's nothing challenging there. They're just rudimentary. Yeah, you could even describe it as padding if you wanted to be unkind.
I would. I 100% would describe it as padding.
But they also, the whole I can't talk about that. The plot element that surrounds, I guess, the largest section around those kind of puzzles is also deeply rooted in the narrative and the folklore of Iceland. So I kind of get why they placed those things in the way they did, but I think it would be fair to say if you're watching this right now and the puzzles were your least favorite thing about Hellblade 1, that isn't going to change with Hellblade 2. It just isn't.
Yeah.
Right? So you make your peace with that.
Make your peace with looking at these red sticks and going, I swear to God, I'm standing in the right location for this, but it's not. I swear to God, if I have to do another Batman Arkham Asylum style Riddler puzzle to line up this logo, I'm going to be furious. Stacey, number one puzzle fan on this podcast, how did you feel?
I think I agree with John, but I feel like you and Tam. In the first game, the runes are the sigils that you had to line up. I did think they were quite a clever way of reflecting Senua's psychosis and kind of seeing things in the world. In the second game, I think the faces do that, because I was like you, I was wandering around and going, there's a face. And you walk up to the rock and there's not a face. And that's the closest you really ever come to looking at the world around you as if something's not quite there, because we're going to talk about the narrative in a little bit, I'm sure, but because you only see through Senua's eyes, I was disappointed by how the blending of reality and mythology was done in this one compared to the first one. I think the faces is the best example of them taking something like the psychosis that Senua has, putting it into a game in a way that still feels sensitive. It doesn't feel like a kind of parody of mental health, but it gets you to a point where you're still looking for shapes and faces around the world. And I think seeing runes in the first game, it was more like the way Senua would look at the world, she would suddenly find a solution. She would find a way to go forward because she was finally seeing clearly, or she could always see clearly, but she couldn't quite make sense of it. In this one, obviously she still, has that condition, but I felt like the use of sigils and runes didn't really underline that. They were just kind of wander around this village for a bit and then you can go through the gate. So yeah, I don't really think it was a case of need to be more or less. I think the runes, sigils, they've been done. They should have gone using the faces and using things that were part of the environment that played into the narrative of the game. Because we've gone a lot about what kind of game is Hellblade. Ultimately, it's a storytelling game. I think Ninja Theory and all of us would agree that the main thing this wants to do is convey a character, convey a story. I think more care should have been put into gamifying elements that supported that instead of focusing on a glowing ball of light so that the ceiling falls down. Because I just hated that bit. I didn't really understand what it was doing.
Yeah. I suppose we'll talk about how we played this game later on, but I did it in 2 sittings, like a 2 hour and a 4 hour, and in that 4 hour, and this was no thanks to the unseasonably roasting hot weather in Scotland, but towards the end there, I was like, we are running to this finish line. I know what's happening here. Like, let's do it. I'm curious to see how this all ends up. And then we get to another area where these balls are floating in there, and I'm like, come on, guys. Like, please, for the love of God, like, we need to... we can't talk about it, but you've just recently done, like, an amazing piece of storytelling set piece that, from a gameplay perspective, if we were to write it down, is basic as fuck, but it is hidden in something that's so good. Whereas this is just floating ball puzzles. There's nothing going on here. Like, this is just a roadblock. So yeah, that was a real letdown for me. Stacey, you mentioned narrative there. Take the lead as a big Hellblade 1 fan. How did you feel it was continued and handled in this game?
Yeah, I felt like in the first Hellblade, it was quite clever because you were never really sure how much of the game was kind of hallucinated, how much of it was things that Senua was imagining, and how much of it was real in reality, not just real to her, but real in reality. There's tons of games that explore myths and gods and monsters and things, and you were never really sure how much of what you were experiencing was really happening to Senua in the same way that, fantastical things happen to someone like Kratos, or how much of it was a woman who's doing a fairly standard thing, but because of we're kind of going inside this health condition for really the first time in a game this size. In the sequel, I feel like they immediately canonize some of the most mythological elements of it. I know we can't talk too much about kind of spoilers and things, but I feel like a lot of the other characters, they just corroborate things that happened to Senua. She kind of goes missing for a while into some cave that shouldn't really be there, and she comes out the other side and is like, hello, like, can I see you again? There's no real understanding of where does she actually go when she does that? What does that mean? And then some of the more vague elements of the first game, unless everybody in this game is a hallucination, they are just outright confirmed to happen in this one. And I think that makes it much weaker. There's this strange like dance of reality almost in the first game where you don't really know what to believe. In this one, you do know what to believe. Like it's pretty clear, I think, the fact and fiction of the game. And I think that makes it weaker.
That cave is actually just in Iceland, so apologies to the Icelandic people for Stacey's comments there. Honestly,
it's a beautiful country.
Shocking.
I've been. It is a it's a beautiful country. It's one of those crazy things you can like. I remember going there when I was much younger, and our guide was leading us through this valley, and there's this beautiful stream, and he goes, drink, and I could just drink out of the stream, and it tasted of sulfur. Because they have all these geothermal. I'm like, great, this is disgusting. But it was cool to be able to do that, Like it is a beautiful, beautiful place. Very, very different.
Are we?
I believe it exists for the record.
Iceland exists.
Set in this, I'd love if your review on TheGamer started with that. It's set in this mythological land of Iceland. John, how do you feel on the old narrative for Hellblade 2?
I think something's hit and miss for me. Overall, I mean, similar to you, I did it in 2 sessions. So I don't want to disparage our friends at Microsoft PR. My initial code, I was like, yay! Because I had such a crazy time frame to turn this around in, because it was like birthday celebrations for my 40th at the weekend. So I was like, I have to have everything wrapped up by Friday. And then we got it a few days before that, and then it didn't work for like 4 hours, and I was like, I'm going to go to bed, and then the code arrived that fixed it all at like midnight, and I played until 2 a.m. So that was my first session, and I was like, I came away, I was like, bloody hell. And then I come back, and similar to you, I finished it again over the course of the next day. Narrative-wise, I really love some of the folklore and stuff. And look, we can say there's giants. They've been in the trailer, right? Okay. We can talk about the giant, right? The way the character's done, and I don't want to give away a spoiler here, but I'll speak in code and hope that you guys all understand what I'm saying. The replay value that exists, that I'm keen to understand what it adds to the narrative, is something that happens after you finish the game. I'm not sure how much of that you guys have gone through again. I have a little bit, and I'm quite impressed at the different angles it then gives me on the overall narrative.
Are you referring to the thing that pops up on the screen once you finish the game when you go back to the menu?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. There's some extra elements there to unlock. So my actual recommendation to folks that may be watching this roundtable and picking up the game on Game Pass or whatever the case may be, is I wouldn't spend your first playthrough doing every nook and cranny. I would savor it and enjoy it at a pace you want to play it at, and then go forward from there. But narrative-wise, I really, really enjoyed it. I thought some of the sequences and the way the game actually told some of the story, the power of certain things, it really came through for me. I agree with Stacey, though, that the psychosis element that existed in Hellblade 1 felt less like what's real, what's not. There are some very pointed moments in this where they laugh at you. There's one point very, very early on, you'll go through, and the Furies, as Senua calls them, they trick you into thinking you're saving loads of people, and then you don't know what's real. Nothing's real, and it's like, God, and it's really powerful. But I feel like they could have done more of that throughout the rest of the game. But yeah.
Yeah, I thought that I enjoyed Senua. I didn't think the narrative was kind of sparkling. I thought certain of the three, I thought one of them was brilliant. I thought that whole thing was fantastic. Includes like an astonishingly like creepy and disgusting visual where the entire screen is filled with eyes, and I was like, this is fucking brilliant. Like, I loved that. I was like, that's so, whoever worked on that, like, gold star, because it properly like made me look away from the screen. But I thought that the kind of side characters felt very disposable, and there's a part towards the end where like things are happening and you're supposed to feel this kind of sense of loss, and I'm like, well, I don't really know you, mate, so I don't really care. Like, I feel like I've been off doing my own thing. As Stacey says, I've been away in this mystery zone. I've been away in the Phantom Zone for hours and hours. Like, this felt very kind of personal to Senua. But yeah, it's not I feel like I will remember Senua's kind of experience in her portrayal fondly, but in like a year, if someone was to ask me what happened in this game, I would tell them one set piece that we can't talk about, and I'd tell them about Senua, and the actual machinations of what goes on, nothing really worked for me. Tam, how are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm pretty much there as well. I thought like the issue is like the brevity of the game means that it's really hard to forge deep and meaningful connections with the characters, and there are certain characters that have character arcs that require you to and Senua to adopt quite drastically different perspectives on them and their lives, and for that to have any sort of like to land and be like effectively delivered, the runtime of the game simply isn't enough for that to happen. Especially given that you spend quite a bit of that time apart doing your own thing in this phantom zone called Iceland. But like it's like when the thing happens, it's exactly when the stuff starts happening, it's exactly what you said. Where it's like, one, I don't really know you. Two, like your history is you have a history which makes this sudden change in your kind of characterization entirely unbelievable, like completely unbelievable. It feels quite abrupt in many ways, which is a shame because I really wanted to kind of buy into it, and I found myself really kind of forcing myself to enjoy the change, even though I didn't really believe it, or it wasn't effectively delivered. Yeah, so that part of it was really rough. Even the Senua stuff, like I'm trying to figure out the most sensitive way of saying this, given the subject matter of the game. Obviously, the thing with the Furies speaking to you constantly, and Senua's inner monologue being multiple voices speaking to her and kind of pulling at her psyche constantly, is returning in this game. I feel like it's less effective in this game because of the kind of journey she goes on. The first game was quite in a conflict journey of discovery, trying to find a kind of stable ground and a better understanding of who she was. And that kind of push and pull between herself and all the voices, it was really impactful. It was like this journey of kind of self-discovery and evolution that is profound and that elevates it. In this game, there's not as much of a journey in evolution here. It's more of like a quest for her. And because of that, the Furies, they don't have really much to offer in terms of what they bring to the characterization. I found most of the time they were just kind of like repeating things or saying things that felt like tell, don't show. For example, it'd be like in a moment like of tension or drama, it'll be like, Senua's scared, she's scared. And then someone else will be like, oh, she's always scared. And like you pan the camera around and she's like just dead faced looking straight ahead. And you're like, is she scared? Like, is she scared? But I felt like I had like someone ad-libbing my journey, but not adding anything. Like I was hair-toing it, and which is a shame because like the value of, I feel like the value, the intention and the purpose of the Furies and that kind of internal monologue was way more effective and way better handled in the first game than the second game. The second game feels, I hope I don't get like people cancel for this, but it's kind of annoying. Like I find it quite annoying. Like where it's like you're not adding anything, you're not providing deeper insight into it. There's moments where like one voice kind of like says something that is kind of could change your perspective on what is happening, but it's so rare. The other time it feels like just chatter or like stuff that feels kind of nonsensical in a lot of ways.
Yeah, like I would say that you're right in the first game it was almost a battle against those inner voices, whereas I would argue that in Hellblade 2 the Furies almost are allies. Sometimes they will play tricks on you, but a lot of the time they're actually there and they're taking Senua's personal side, because there is also the other element of the voice she hears, which as I understand it's referred to as the darkness. And there's a whole plot piece there that's relating to, again, elements of the first game with her past and her family and stuff like that. But they definitely feel more on your side. And one thing I actually missed in combat from the Furies, which I really loved in the first game, was that if an enemy was behind you and they were about to strike, they would say, "Look out, behind you," and you would instinctively block and catch that sword coming in before you'd even seen it. And in this, that doesn't happen so much because the combat is way more cinematic. But
they go,
yeah,
you're about to fight someone one-on-one again. Here's another one. Here's another one coming.
There's no real combat value to them because the camera and the animations is constantly reorienting you. Like there are times where I was like, is this the same battle? Did I already do this? And like they are definitely on your side, but they don't bring anything to the like I'm not telling people how to like write their stories, but like that sense of growth and the kind of the point that she's reached with her inner voices isn't reflected very well in the game by the Furies themselves. It's not like she has a dialogue with them in the same way, like, for example, like a Disco Elysium style thing, where it's like you're having this back and forth and figuring things out. They're mostly there just to comment on your inner feelings. And also, weirdly, they're not part of the gamification of combat, but they are part of the gamification of traversal and puzzle solving. Because there are points where they're like, you need to do this, you need to go there, behind you, that's the cave, etc., etc. So it's like...
They're like Freya from God of War.
They're like, I'm just like, listen, I know we've been through a lot, but can you stop backseat driving for a minute, please?
One time that happened where they gave me a puzzle, like, they gave me like a pointer towards something, and I hadn't even like looked. I was like looking at some mountain. I was like, "Oh, this maybe a wee photo mode moment. Get that 100 gamer score for just opening the photo mode." Yeah. And then they're like, "Do the thing over there." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, "Oh, okay, well." But I mean, it's
a real shame.
That's a real symptom of modern gaming.
I wanted more out of that element of it, and it felt like a step back in a lot of ways, and I just felt like it was something that they needed to do because it was a unique selling point of the original game.
Yeah, it does. Again, if you wear headphones, the binaural audio stuff is brilliant.
Sounds great.
Especially because at one point I wasn't wearing headphones and my PC was still set up to deliver the audio as if I had headphones. So all of the audio was just funneled into one channel, completely unlistenable. 5 different people talking to me at once. I was like, this is a real experience. I'm really in Senua's head now. Yeah. The mental health stuff is interesting because it's obviously going to be different to like different people, and there's no real arbiter of how well it's handled or not kind of thing. But yeah, I don't have super strong feelings on that element of it specifically. I do get the combat thing's actually a great shout, John, about how they don't have like a reflexive parry thing anymore. You just see a big axe coming towards your head and they're like, you should probably press RB now.
So finally, just before we go, we should chat about the game's presentation. I was struggling to think of a modern game with realistic graphics that looks better than this. John, how did you feel on it, and what do you think about its place in the current pantheon of real-ass looking games?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I wouldn't actually... It is realistic. I would describe it as a type of hyper-realism. Like there is a... I don't know if there's a certain way the lighting is done that I feel is almost like it's hyper real, right? It's almost too good. What's the Gears phrase? It's just so badass, it's almost too good. Whatever. It is without doubt one of the best looking things I've ever seen. And it's interesting. I have an ultra wide Xenon Flex, right? So 144 hertz OLED screen here, so I could play the game on PC at 90 FPS on a 4090 with no black bars. And I did play some of it, but the majority, like 5 hours of my playtime, was on my Xbox Series X because I have an 86-inch LG, and it just looked insane.
Yeah.
And I just could and people that have made a hoo-ha about the 30 FPS and the black bars. The framing of it is certainly filmic. It is a cinematic choice in terms of how they're telling their story and framing each shot. But I doubt you will find something that will look if you want a next gen showcase, this is the game. Like, I don't think there's anything that looks better on console than this. It is nuts.
Stacey, visuals.
Yeah, we've done a fair few of these podcasts now, Jordan. We always end on performance, and I always say, we had a discussion. I can't remember what game it was. You asked whether I played on performance and fidelity, and I just kind of went, whatever the normal one was. The graphics just don't do it for me. I found out with that when I actually didn't have it on the higher settings. Played it again, was like, oh yeah, I see where it's coming from. But I don't usually care for graphics because I think there's more interesting things you can usually do with a game with budget with stuff. But I was really surprised by not just how great Hellblade was, because John's right, the detail of it is spectacular, but how much I was made to care about it. And I think that's because it's so, even though we've criticized the story, and I still think there's a lot of elements to that don't really work. Senua as a character is someone that I want to root for. I think there's a lot that she brings to the table overall. There's a couple of moments when it zooms in on her face and you see her, she almost sniffs back a tear, and you see all the wrinkles on the face twitching. For me, that was like when The Last of Us came out, people were like, I've never seen a rope look this ropey before. And I was like, I don't care. It's a rope. But this, for me, was my moment of that. Yeah. I've never seen fabric move like this. This was my moment for that, when I was like, I've never actually seen a face move like this in a video game. And I felt kind of pulled into the story by that. I felt like it had a purpose to it. So that's definitely, you mentioned before, when we spoke this in the year, what do you remember? That's the moment I'm going to remember. Yes, there's a couple of cinematic things I know we can't talk about, but it's particularly the detailing on the face that we'd seen in a few trailers, and I thought, it won't be like that in the game. It never is. It's better than it is in the trailers in some moments, and I think that's really special.
Yeah.
Tam is the most graphic man amongst us. How do you feel?
I think it definitely has a lot of graphics.
Yeah, loads of them. Fucking hundreds of the graphics.
So many graphics, man. I can't tell you. It looks. I remember looking at it and being like, "This looks really nice, like crisp." I feel like aesthetically, it's quite kind of one note for a lot of it. It's that very grey and like very cold, craggy aesthetic and like color palette that makes a lot of sense for Iceland, and then you get some kind of more sun-drenched stuff, Elysium feels, that kind of stuff. But the issue that I have with it is, personally, after a little while, I was like, it would be nice for some variety here. And I just didn't get that. And maybe that's an unfair expectation of it. It also, like, the fidelity on a lot of it is so high that when you see something that isn't there, it really sticks out. And one particular thing is the water. When there's a section where you get to see some water up close, and it looks really weird. Like, I was looking, I was like, what's going on here? I played it purely on Xbox Series X, and I was just like, oh, this is very strange. But that's a minor thing. Otherwise, it's fine. The character models are really nice, very, very expressive, and that's where my other kind of concern, or like the thing that I found myself thinking about a lot, came into play. Senua is very, 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 very expressive. So is every other character, but like her, she's on a different level. But then they kind of need to show you that. And to show you that, the kind of acting feels very exaggerated. Like you need to move the faces. Her face looks like it's moving in a very unrealistic way at times because they need to show you how the face is being manipulated, right? To be like, wow, cool, that's so detailed. But like, it felt in the moment, I was like, yeah, I see you're going through it right now, but like, this is a very, very like, I felt like I was watching like that scene from Heavy Rain where the guy's falling over constantly, and and like where someone's got a video where they miss every like QTE event to see him like trip on a chicken, fall down some stairs, walk into like a glass pane. Like this was at times I was like, this is straight up Looney Tunes reactions right now. But like it's just like she's every moment it's like she's grimacing and twisting around and sweating and breathing. I'm like, you're doing the most right now. Like I get it, but like this is a lot. And it kind of pulled me out of it at times, which is like, I really loved the subtle performance in the first game. Like it had that extreme end as well, but it had like a quiet sadness and like it had like an expressiveness that felt a little more like human and muted in the original. This felt like a case was being made for using high-end motion capture technology. And because of it, it felt unnatural at times. I feel like a lot of the like other characters that aren't Senua felt like better representations of real kind of performances and acting that felt, relatable and able to draw empathy from me. Whereas at a certain point, I'd be like, "You're being weird. Please stop. Relax." To Senua, and it's like it's weird because like it's a weird position it puts them in. Like they need to be able to show that this stuff is happening, but they can only do that by acting a bit over the top. And it's just, some people will be like, it's fine. Other people like me who are freaks about this stuff will be like, I don't like it.
It's like when you see up close footage of like theater acting for the cheap seats, like they have to be so expressive for the back of the theater, but it doesn't translate to a screen, perhaps.
It feels like the next evolutionary step of the LA Noire like liquid face movement thing where they
that's
how they
harsh.
constantly were like
that's so harsh.
But like no, but this is like that like the fidelity of that, the technology wasn't there and it looked weird. Like this has that same kind of like expressiveness, but the technology is also there and it looks good. But then you're just like, why are you moving your face this much?
Oh, I didn't think we'd have a Heavy Rain reference in this in this review, but there we are. I think it looks fantastic. It has what I describe as the Death Stranding moment, where there's a moment in Death Stranding where you're walking up this massive hill for the first time. It looks photoreal. He'll keep coming, etc. And I'm like, I could go there. That just looks like Scotland. I could go there half an hour from here. And I had that same feeling in this multiple times. It's like I have drank on a beach that looks exactly like this. This is so photorealistic. I know what you mean. Like, as you said, some people won't be bothered by the kind of mega acting. I wasn't. Like, it didn't bother me. It's a sequence we can't talk about, but there is a part where you see more people than you have seen in the game thus far, let's say. And if you look at those character models, they are not to the same standard as Senua and the rest of the crew. And I was like, okay, let's keep going. But yeah, Senua is like there are parts of this game that I feel like they will teach in universities for the next like 10-15 years from a sheer presentational, like technical and audio graphics perspective. It's the first thing Xbox has had that has that Naughty Dog effect of like, there's money here. There's some serious fucking money being spent on the way this looks. This looks like this is the height of like, it's the first time. I think it's the first time that you can safely say that the best looking current generation game is like an Xbox title. And I don't know how it looks on it. I played it on a 4090 as well because me and John are rich as fuck, but
massively in debt.
Yeah, well, mine was #gifted. Thank you. But I don't know how it looks on consoles. Like, Stacey, you play on console?
I did actually play on the Series S, so the worst.
You played on the
option
Series S? You played on the fucking Nintendo Wii? Jesus Christ.
It looks remarkably fine.
Yeah.
Like, you'd be surprised.
Put that on the box.
But
I can one up you because I was like just messing around. I played it on an Amazon Kindle using remote play.
Wow.
And it still looks like, I was like, this looks nice.
Maybe that's why the faces didn't quite look right.
Yeah,
I was just kind of curious to see like how
Did it work?
if I was just like I was trying to see if this works. Has it got any better? And yeah, it has. That's the remote play technology that they're working with is really good now. And like it looked really nice. I tried to play it on my phone in the gym. Like obviously it's a private gym, so no one else is in there. So I'm not like showing everyone around me an embargo game or anything. But like it like, on the phone, it wasn't as good because like you're missing a lot of the details. But when I put it in a Kindle and like just kind of, it's a bigger tablet, so I was looking at it, I was like, this is kind of nice. I like this, the way this like surprisingly well done.
Yeah. You're the guy that watches Oppenheimer on his phone, like one AirPod in, like
second screen. I've got something else.
Yeah. Okay. Before we go, 2-sentence final thoughts, John.
I think it's interesting talking about all the animation and the money spent. Ninja Theory have via Microsoft been able to build out, I think the highest end mocap studio in gaming, which a lot of the other studios now plan to use. So, and I know there's been a lot of trepidation now considering recent events. What happens to Ninja Theory? What happens to games like this? Because they've approached this, and this is their words, independent AAA. And I went into it with that spirit in mind. Like I much prefer most AAA games nowadays bore me to tears. Like it's just the same game I played 20 years ago, rehashed with fancier graphics. And this felt like an indie game with a Hollywood budget. Right? That's the best way I can describe it. And I love it for that. I love that spirit of indie experimental. Yes, we're going to take everything that we did in the first game, but we're going to just dial it up to 11. And like it or hate it, puzzle lovers be damned. We're going to do that, and that's what we've made. And I really, really enjoyed my time with it. I thought the experience was breathtaking. And playing through in those 2 sessions, there are certain sequences that we have not been able to show, have not been able to talk about that are relevant to the plot, that were literally jaw-dropping, and also delivered narrative with it that I was super, super impressed by. And I think looking at it through that lens, importantly, looking at it through the lens of that this is not an action RPG, but it is a narrative walking sim game with some combat in, I think it's at the top of its class. There you go. That's my thoughts.
I'm less positive.
I
know. For me, I've been thinking about this a lot. The gameplay part of it, when I'm actually having to play the game, is my least favorite part of it, and that is pretty much the most damning thing you can say about a video game. Like, it excels in all the things that aren't essential for a good game. Like, you can make an amazing game that doesn't have beautiful graphics and presentation and stuff like that, but you cannot make an amazing game that does not have good gameplay. And in my opinion, Hellblade 2 does not have good gameplay. It has combat that is flashy, serviceable, which I think is kind. It has puzzles that I have made clear I am no fan of. And I think that as I said, I think it would be a better experience. Chop off 2 hours, focus more on, and I know this is the bane of people listening to reviews life, but focus more on the things we can't talk about, and go forward from there. Yeah, I thought this would be like a coming out party, not only for Ninja Theory, but for Hellblade, and it would elevate this into like one of the franchises that Microsoft would kind of put their hat on when they have a lot of stuff. I know they've done it recently, but it's kind of because they've not like had a ton. But that would be okay. We've got our super serious narrative game. Put that in there, and I just don't see that being the case here. But from a pure technical perspective, like I can't knock it. It's as jaw dropping, breathtaking. Yes, but that's when I'm looking at some fine ass fucking rocks and some fine ass grass. But as soon as you get a bubble puzzle in front of me, I'm like, I'm going to snap my PC in half. Stacey, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think it is an indie AAA, and I think the indie parts are good, and I think the AAA parts are bad. That's basically how I feel about it. the overdone combat, the puzzles, all of the things that are in there because Xbox and Ninja Theory or whoever wants to take this to the next level, to make it a little bit more marketable or accessible, to make it feel like a kind of game that somebody who's not going to be sold on it's a 10-hour mental health saga. They're gonna need to do something with that. I think all those elements detract from the game, and I think because of that, what's left isn't clear enough in what it wants to be.
Very good. Tam, final thoughts before we get out of here.
So Ninja Theory, after DMC Devil May Cry, a game that I like a lot, they worked on a few games like Disney Infinity 3.0, but Hellblade was the big swing for them. And I remember talking to the team at the time and even like going there to do interviews and stuff. And they had the mentality of a almost defiant studio. They were scrappy, and everything that they put together to make Senua's Sacrifice work was shoestring budget, like just jerry-rigged, kind of like setups of motion capture technology that was like on the low end that they like found and sourced and improved. And they really like fought through blood, sweat, tears, and like hard graft using what little they had to make a game that is remembered as being pretty exceptional in a lot of ways. It's one of the few examples of a small studio punching so far above its weight that it was noteworthy, and they made an award-winning game that did more than just be like a game. It was a game that was largely enjoyable and then had a lot to say. The next step for them, not taking into account like the VR games and Bleeding Edge, was a sequel to this game where they had all the resources in the world. The complete opposite of the first game. And they made a game, to me, that is less interesting in every conceivable way, less enjoyable in every conceivable way, and has much less to say. And I don't think Ninja Theory's like whole existence is predicated on always fighting tooth and nail for something. But at the risk of speaking out of turn, I don't think this is their identity. I don't think an endless budget kind of blank check video game experience is where they shine. I'm sure they could shine. I feel like when they're like scrappy underdog coming up with interesting, unique ideas, trying to do more with what little they have, they make exceptional, cool, fun, like thought-provoking games. This was not that. It was pretty much, for me, uninteresting in every aspect of it. The gameplay was so boring to me. It looks nice, and it's got one or two set pieces that are like, that's cool, but that's about it for me.
Okie doke. Well, that was 1/6 of the length of Hellblade spent talking about Hellblade 2. You can find all of our reviews, XboxEra, GameSpot, TheGamer, VGC First. If you've not went to VGC First, then get your IP banned and your house burned to the ground. You can follow all of us on social media. I will have links below. But until next time, thank you all for joining me. Say goodbye, John.
Goodbye, John. Wait, no.
No.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You're very welcome. The thing is, John, there's people on the internet that think VGC has a bias against Xbox. There's even more people on the internet that think I'm a bias
token
against
Xbox.
I mean, no, Stacey's the token Xbox. Stacey hates all the fancy Sony games.
That's
with their
true, yeah.
AAAs.
We've had this a lot where I've been the one who stands up against The Last of Us.
Yeah. Thank you very much for coming on. Say goodbye, Tam.
Appreciate it.
See you later.
Say goodbye, Stacey.
Goodbye.
Catch your regular VGC the Video Game Podcast this week on Fridays. And until next time, I'm Jordan Midler. See you later.